apologies for running late, and thank you for someone who made that work. I'm, as I said there, clinical psychologist. I have worked for a long time with people with chronic illnesses of various kinds, so long-term chronic pain problems, MS, and to some extent with SCAR. So, but I really don't actually have a lot of experience with anything bar the MS stuff, which is got lots of similarities but also lots of differences. But from a psychological perspective, I think the difficulty in dealing with long-term chronic illness has lots of similarities from one condition to another, and so that's probably my claim to have some expertise in this area. I thought just briefly we would look at depression, and this comes from the American Psychiatric Association it's called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It's the Bible on diagnosis. But very briefly, because sometimes people are not quite sure what depression is, and this is clinical depression in the sense of you would actually get a diagnosis of depression. We're talking about depressed mood most of the time, loss of interest in most things, that sort of flatness that people experience, where nothing seems to actually feel good anymore, and stuff that they've done and enjoyed in the past is just not interesting, or they lose the drive, the involvement in life. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but because a lot of people will know about depression. Weight loss, weight gain, loss of appetite changes, very common. Sleeping problems are very common. Either people have difficulty getting to sleep, or they wake repeatedly through the night and struggle to get back to sleep. Or the classic one is sort of waking at 4 or 5 in the morning and then just not being able to get back to sleep at all. Basically depression sort of plays with your head really, and a lot of the systems in it, and to a large extent I guess I think about depression quite frequently as almost putting the body in slow-mo, because your metabolic rate slows down, all sorts of physiological changes occur. And one of the things I learned from a doctor many years ago, which I should have learned in psychology school, but they didn't tell me this, because his comment was emotional states are physical states, and when we talk about things like anxiety and depression and anger, we describe them or think about them as a psychological state, but in truth they're a physiological state. Because if I said, if you went into panic, what would you feel? And you would give me a list of physical symptoms. My heart rate fires up, I start to breathe quickly, I feel hot, I feel cold, I feel this, I sweat, or whatever. There's all these physical symptoms, and depression is very much the same sort of condition, in the sense that the body is quite reverse almost of anxiety, in the sense it goes into slow-mo and winds down, and systems that normally function well, like sleeping and some of the other things, go into disarray. And there's some, I'm not sure why anyone would have done this, but there's some great research from years and years ago that found that if you're actually clinically depressed, the rate at which your gut processes food is slower than it is for people who aren't depressed. So there's all of these massive physical changes in the body with real depression. And so this is sort of real clinical stuff. Psychomotor agitation, retardation. In other words, people tend to slow down sometimes, they get lethargic, and that goes obviously with the next one, with fatigue and loss of energy. But also sometimes people are agitated, they can't relax, they're constantly on the move, and that can also be a symptom of being depressed, as it can be a symptom of being anxious and stressed, of course. So, and there's also, and sorry that's got messed up, I've actually added a couple of bits into this, but feeling that you don't have the energy to do things or can't. Often I run into people who are depressed who say, look, I just can't, and it's not as if they don't have the ability to do this or do that. It might just be tidying up the kitchen or something, but they actually say, I can't. And it's not that they're lazy, and often they accuse themselves of being lazy because they've got the time, but they just find themselves sitting down and resting. And it's because they just literally can't. Their body's in slow-mo, they don't have that energy to do the task. And so, and that can cause lots of sort of psychological problems with people, in the sense that they feel because they're not doing things, they then sort of point the finger back at themselves and say, look, I'm hopeless, I should be doing this, I should be doing that. Which is really what lots of depression is about, is us being derogatory about ourselves and or a sense of hopelessness, quite frequently. When people are really seriously depressed, their ability to think, to concentrate, their memory doesn't function well, they have memory lapses, they forget things. I often have people either turn up the day before an appointment or the wrong time for an appointment, or miss an appointment completely just because they're not on the ball intellectually, they're not feeling on top of things. Irritability is also one of the things that people often experience with depression. They're short, they're snappy, they're grumpy. Social withdrawal, social isolation, classic stuff. In that people, because they feel so bad, they pull back from the world, from other people, from friends, and even within their own families. Sometimes they tend to pull back from the world and stay in their bedrooms or in bed. In quite severe cases, people just put themselves to bed and stay there for weeks at a time sometimes. And then, of course, the classic stuff with depression is that people, when they feel really flat, start to think about suicide, or more, quite often, I wish I wasn't here. I wish I could go to sleep and not wake up. They're not actively suicidal, they're not, excuse me, actually planning to do anything, but they just feel so flat, so awful, that it would just be nice if the lights were turned off and I didn't have to deal with this anymore. And the other thing that sometimes you see when people really are depressed and they turn it back on themselves is people who actually start to do themselves some harm, where they feel so much, almost self-loathing, that they start to cut themselves. And I've seen some people who are very normal people in a sense. They're not sort of seriously crazy, if I can use that word in any sense, but these are very normal people who have just sunk into an awful state to the point where they hate themselves so much that they just think, here, cop that. So it's a sort of a way of almost turning on yourself. So that's the sort of severe clinical depression stuff. And then I'll skip that, I think, because that's sort of more sort of technical jargon about the diagnosis, and you don't need to know that. From my perspective, depression, I see depression at all sorts of levels, and I guess I've felt for a long time, when people run into something like a chronic illness, where there is no fix, there's nothing to be done that makes it all go away, where there's lots of uncertainty, as there is with lots of neurological conditions, where is it this long, what do I expect from this, and there's lots of uncertainty. And I think that for lots of people it's almost impossible to avoid a period of some depression with that at some point, whether it's pretty much straight. Apologies for that. My son just finished work. And I think, as I've said up here, there's a grieving process, I think, that people experience, where if you ask me, and it's a very vague one, but I have a sense of what my future is about, what I would hope to do with the next 20 years, and what I hope what I can expect from life, in a sense. But that may all change like that in a flash, and that there's a process that people go through, I think, we're grieving almost the loss of the life that you hoped to have, wanted to have, and people, and there are many losses, I guess, that people go through with that, in the sense that, as I said, the whole future has changed in what you might expect from life. The issue of control is also one that's important in people very much.